This is a story about a powerful cultivator named Lucas. The peculiarity of this master is that he has devoted his entire life to spiritual practices, only to fulfill two main goals. The first is to become the best at what he does, and the second is to move into the magic realm. As soon as the first item was completed, Lucas immediately went to the gods to ask them to give them permission to send him to the magic kingdom, but unfortunately was refused, because according to them the kingdom is already full and new participants are no longer accepted. As soon as our hero drew his sword to defend his position, God immediately warned him that it was a big mistake, because just one thunderclap and life would be cut short. But such childish techniques will not scare Lucas. The guy persistently trained for 300 years, and was able to ascend to immortality. That's why no thunder today will not stop him. After these words, God simply could not stand such insolence on the part of an ordinary man, and immediately tried to attack. The guy in his turn was not frightened in any way, and even instead of going on the defensive, ran to attack back. With the words that if God was obstructing him, he should be destroyed, no matter how powerful he was. As a result, from the first attack, a huge barrage of fire rained down on the opponent, causing enormous damage, after which he simply vanished into space. Frankly speaking, to achieve such a result Lucas had to put absolutely all his strength into this blow, but it was definitely worth it. Because now the passageway to the magic kingdom was completely open, and without any obstacles it was possible to enter it without any obstacles. Lucas, overjoyed after his victory, decided not to waste any time and immediately flew upwards to move as soon as possible. Once the process was fully completed, to put it mildly, the guy saw in front of him something he absolutely could not expect. Because the name Magic Kingdom could not be associated with some dark corner, where our hero is beaten by two men, without even explaining the reason for such abnormal actions. The only thing that could be heard from potential rivals. So it's requests to fulfill their various whims, for them to just let the guy go. Not much analyzing the situation, Lucas realized that in the bodies of these guys, absolutely no fluctuations of spiritual energy. Based on this we can assume that this is definitely not a magical kingdom. In any case, at this point, Lucas had nothing to do but stand up for himself, because he wasn't used to anyone letting their hands loose in his direction. Initially, the guy just intercepted his opponent's punch, and clenched his fist so hard that he couldn't even take it back. The bandit's amazement was unprecedented, because he could not understand how in just a few minutes, a man who they had been kicking with ease all their lives, managed to become so strong, to learn how to properly intercept a blow, and at the same time to communicate as if nothing was happening. But as they say, this is just the beginning, because further Lucas made a strong blow with his knee, after which his opponent flew away for several dozen meters, and made a hard landing directly on his back. The second bandit, instead of just running away, thoroughly decided to stand up for his comrade, so even used magic. Realizing that the matter was getting hot, Lucas tried to use his spiritual power, but for some reason he couldn't do it. The guy even tensed up at this point, because he didn't understand how he could stand up to a man with superpowers. But in fact, it was not as bad as you might think, because even though our hero lost the ability to use spiritual power, with such a low level of ability, the opponent will not be able to defeat the master, who allocated 300 years for his training. With just one deft sidestep, Lucas discovered an opportunity to deliver a powerful fist punch right to the stomach and immediately took advantage of it. After that, his opponent started bouncing off the walls like a rubber ball and flying all over the courtyard. In the end, to make the bandit remember once and for all that it is not good to lead people around the corner and beat them up, the guy gave him a powerful kick from his foot right in the face. After such a serious repulse, the guys calmed down pretty quickly, got down on their knees, and apologized for all the inconvenience. And only after the guy let them leave did the guys immediately snap out of it and start running off in an unknown direction. Now their main goal is to tell their boss as soon as possible that Lucas may have awakened his abilities, so that he won't punish them so much for not doing their job properly. When the danger had passed, memories from the past owner of this body gradually began to return to the guy's head. As it turned out, he lost his parents at a very early age because of a car accident. At least his mom's close friend was not afraid of responsibility and adopted the boy, because there was no one else. As a result of the accident and severe stress, the boy gradually began to develop a disease that, to put it mildly, made him a bit different from the rest. Against this background, he became the subject of constant ridicule and bullying from his peers. Based on the situation, Lucas allowed the theory that the deliberate cutting of the sky did not help him to rise, but on the contrary made him turn into an ordinary man and get into this strange world. The power that used that guy is called superpower, and most people in this world eventually awaken it in themselves. The main problem with Lucas's new body is not only that it has an incurable disease, but also that no one has been able to awaken in it yet. So far, our hero only has to learn how to use it properly, so as not to harm it and maybe even help it to awaken. Suddenly some cute girl appeared on the horizon, and judging by her facial expression, she was very worried about the guy. But it is not surprising, because based on the memories, it is Marina, the native daughter of Lucas's foster mother. She always tries to help when he is bullied. Also, in the owner's memories there is that every time he was injured, the girl always provided medical assistance at the expense of her magic, which suggests that superpowers have their own attributes and classifications. It's a good thing that at least this time Lucas didn't get beaten up too badly. Because as a rule, when Marina tries to heal some heavy wounds, then she herself becomes ill, and she has to go to the hospital, so that the doctors bring her to her senses. By the way, the first thing the guy asked his sister was something like this: "How can ordinary people hurt me?" Since the girl did not even approximately suspect that before her stood not her brother, but Lucas, she thought hard enough how to answer this strange question, but then she simply accepted the theory that against the background of the disease began problems with schizophrenia, so she decided not to pay much attention to it. In any case, it is time for them to go home as soon as possible, because gradually evening comes, and the mother is expecting her children. Well, after all that Lucas has seen today, he can say with certainty that this world is completely different from the one he was in before. Besides all the fights and supernatural power, the thing he liked the most was a vehicle called a car, because with it you can easily travel hundreds of miles. A less pleasant innovation is that people of different ages are dressed very openly, which makes it possible to visualize with almost perfect accuracy what is behind a thin blouse or blouse. In the past world it was against etiquette, because a woman was always supposed to dress as closed as possible. When it comes to superpowers, it's the dominant force in this world. Lucas still doesn't understand the aura here at all and whether the cultivators will eventually be affected by the powers. The road ahead is really hard to recreate a new world. But no matter how it is, our hero will still achieve his long-standing desire for ascension. When the guys finally went up to the floor, Marina was insanely happy, because she wanted to go home, to rest a little and have a delicious dinner, but unfortunately the joy did not last long. Because out of the front door came out of her own father, which she just cannot stand as memories to our hero comes gradually. He did not even recognize this man, and at first could not understand why Marina was so much scared, because it's just her father. By the way, his name is Donald. His father's visit today was just to talk to his ex-wife about some details, so in his opinion, Marina could not worry so much, because at least today, the father did not try to return to the family, and did not even think about trying to start again. Then Mom appeared on the horizon, and judging by her expression she, too, was extremely unhappy that her ex-husband was staying in the apartment for too long. In this case, Donald, realizing that everyone in this house wanted only one thing, decided not to linger long and hugged his own daughter goodbye. But was rudely rebuffed and told never to touch again. Even so, Donald was still very unhappy, and promised the girls that he would be back in a couple of days anyway, with the subtle implication that no matter how hard they tried, they would never be able to get rid of him completely. In the meantime, Charlie finally had a flashback to Donald. Initially, they had just a gorgeous romance with Christina, Marina's mother, but as time went on, the man began to behave rather strangely, namely interfering too much in her personal life, constantly trying to control everything, and not giving anyone peace of mind. Of course, no adequate, self-loving woman I would like to see next to me and my daughter, such an abnormal man, and Christine did everything possible to eventually divorce him. But as practice shows, Donald is still coming around, and that can't be a good thing. That same evening Lucas went for a walk. He just couldn't be in the apartment anymore because there were too many thoughts in his head and he needed to get checked out right away so he wouldn't go crazy, and at the same time try to practice. Hopefully this body was capable of cultivating and would allow him to get up to speed eventually. The first thing he decided to do was to use a technique called Ancient Spirit. It was his personal development from his past life. Its essence was to infuse qi into the body and nourish the human spirit, the spirit of heaven. This technique can also condense the absorbed spiritual energy to make his orb more durable. After only a few minutes, our hero was already able to feel the aura of this world. Frankly speaking, he was very surprised at how thin it is, and even with the help of ancient spiritual energy, can condense only 3 spiritual forces, which is considered a weak indicator. Qi penetrates the muscles and veins, quenches the will, supports the nature and strengthens the spirit to reach the maximum level in the end. You have to persevere, no matter how difficult it is, because there is no other way to achieve results. By the end of today's class, Lucas had already achieved a simply stunning result. It's because the spiritual energy is as subtle as possible, and the guy could practice it in the blink of an eye. He had to stop abruptly, because there was a girl screaming for help, and then she fell down right next to Lucas's bench. As it turned out, she got into very serious trouble, because some man was unable to restrain his instincts, and at the sight of such a bright, open outfit just went crazy, and was ready to do anything to spend the evening with this lonely lady. At the first opportunity, the poor girl turned to the guy for help, because she had no other choice. Either Lucas will save her right now, or this bandit will catch up and do his job. Of course, our hero does not welcome such a thing, so he could not pass by and first express what he thinks about it. Since no one in this life likes to hear unpleasant words in his address, not even the bandits. The man went off the chain and promised Lucas that right now he would feel the power of the second-level abilities. On the one hand, the situation is very tense, but on the other hand, it's just a unique opportunity to try his powers after practicing. So you shouldn't get frustrated ahead of time, and just try to take the fight with dignity. As soon as Lucas discovered that his opponent had the thunder attribute, he immediately realized what he needed to use to finish this fight in the shortest possible time. Once all the lightning had turned into the most ordinary ice, the opponent could do nothing else but stand still and complain because his hands were frozen and no more energy was flowing to them. Before delivering the decisive blow, Lucas wanted the bandit to remember that only a weak-minded person would choose a level opponent. Before he could even say anything in response, the bandit missed a powerful blow with his fist, after which he jumped up and started spitting blood. This fight was the second time he proved that on the battlefield you can't get away with just your abilities. You have to think with your head and always respect your opponent. In the meantime, the girl ran up behind him and hugged him, complimenting him on the smell, because she found it as delicious as possible. Lucas looked into her eyes and noticed that her blood circulation was too high, which was a direct indication that someone had drugged her with illegal substances. In this case, the guy decided to give up the hug and used his strength to dissolve the forbidden substance in her body in a second. Now, of course, she looks far from the best, but when she gets home, after a nice cup of black tea, she should come to her senses right away. Suddenly, a man appears on the horizon, and he declares to the whole park that Lucas should get away from his sister, and before approaching him he activates his abilities. He probably wants to attack the guy and get revenge, even though the culprit has long since been punished. The uniqueness of this opponent lies in the fact that first of all he is not the second level, but the third, and instead of lightning he has fire. Well, let's see how different this one is from the last one. But first we had to carefully place the girl on the bench. At the moment of the first blow, Lucas did not intentionally conduct any counterattacks, but just dodged to fully understand the potential of the opponent. After what time it became clear that everything is not so terrible, because the opponent, despite all his power, still lacks the speed of attack to accurately hit. So even though our hero's cultivation level was not above the 5th level of chi refining, it was enough to deal with people with low-level superpowers and throw them straight into a tree if he wanted to. The opponent's disappointment at this moment was not limited, because he realized that Lucas was too fast and it was not so easy to repel his blows. When the victory was already in his pocket, the guy put his foot on his head and began to remember all the threats that came from the mouth of this man. Such a rather brazen act began to ignite a strong fire of anger inside the loser. He refused to accept his defeat and secretly activated a hidden skill. At first it was not noticeable, but when smoke came even from his mouth, Lucas immediately realized that he was going to do some kind of trick. A few moments later there was an explosion, which was accompanied by a lot of fire and a strong blast wave, after which our hero flew a few meters away. Then the opponent admitted that he may not be very good at this skill, but now his strength is definitely enough to fight Lucas. In this case, our hero, nothing else was left but to create a barrier field around him, which will weaken all the blows in a certain range. So from now on, such a low level of flame would not be able to even come close to Lucas. As soon as the opponent realized this, a whole bunch of questions immediately appeared in his head, and he even began to guess that Lucas did not really have any superpowers, and fights with the help of some other, unknown power. So there was nothing else left but to finally calm down and try to start a peaceful dialogue. As you can see, Lucas, even despite the fact that he was attacked for absolutely nothing, is as calm as possible, and recommends his opponent to come to the same state, because if he continues in the same way, then because of the strong pressure inside the heart can simply not withstand and finish the job before time. Looking at his opponent, the guy began to notice that he was about to lose his life, although he originally thought that this stage would come a little later. Since there was no desire to take anyone's life, he had no choice but to approach and heal his opponent, so that he finally realized that he was not an enemy. As you might expect, the effect was almost instantaneous, and you could say our hero saved his life. Then a small dialogue ensued between them, where Lucas said that he actually wanted to protect his opponent's sister and nothing more, and certainly did not intend to destroy anyone. Meanwhile, the baby finally woke up, and the guys got to know each other. This fiery brother who is ready to tear for his sister is called Chris, and the girl's name is Maria, and judging by her happy expression, she is feeling much better. When she got closer, she immediately confirmed Lucas' words that he had saved her. She told the story that when she was in the bar, some malevolent person had put illegal substances in her glass and started to molest her, but a guy was there to help her. After hearing the story, Chris blushed a lot, because he realized how wrong he was, and immediately apologized for getting into a fight without even knowing the situation. Since all misunderstandings were completely resolved, Lucas decided not to stay long, and said that he was going on his own business. Then the grandfather of the two young men, named Charlie, appeared on the horizon, and as it turned out he had been watching what was going on all this time, and in principle, even considering the fact that his grandchildren had almost lost their lives, he was in a rather high spirits. Grandpa understood perfectly well that if it wasn't for Lucas's help, most likely his grandson would have exploded now, and everything would be far from so rosy. That's why Charlie wanted to invite the guy to his little house to repay his help and talk a little about the situation. But in response, our hero simply passed by and said that he did not do it for the reward. To somehow attract the young man's attention, the old man told him that he was also quite well aware of the secrets of ancient practices, and he wanted to know how Lucas had suppressed Chris's abilities with just his hands. Frankly speaking, the guy is not interested, only for one simple reason: there is absolutely no fluctuations in spiritual power around Charlie, and he is also very sick, but there is also a peculiarity in him. It consists in the fact that the old man can feel changes in the spiritual power of Lucas. He is definitely not so simple. When the guys were alone, out of curiosity Chris immediately asked who it could be, because his body and strength were quite unusual. Maria, in turn, decided not to wait for an answer, and said openly that Lucas was very nice and apparently a good doctor. It would be nice if he helped Grandpa with his legs. The girl is definitely right about something, but for now she has to keep her mouth shut, because her grandfather doesn't want this situation to get out, and he ordered Chris to get all the information about Lucas, because Charlie's goal is to meet him at least one more time and talk to him. The next morning, his foster mom came to his room and told him that school started today. In honor of this beautiful day, Christina prepared a special gift for Lucas, a new uniform, for which she had to spend 3 months' salary. Then Marina burst into the room, because she did not like that the guy too just reacted. After all, the mother tried, specially for a long time, picked up, and in the end paid such a huge amount of money. In fact, Lucas was really shocked. Just by himself he is modest, and rarely shows true emotion. Also, this kind of action confirmed the fact that although Lucas is not a native son, but he is treated as a full-fledged member of the family, because even Marina does not always receive such expensive gifts. In general, the girls can't wait for the guy to try on the suit and show how he looks like in it. To feel such warmth and goodwill. Lucas said to himself confidently that it was his responsibility to protect this family, to take it under his wing, and to make sure that it never suffered at the hands of someone else, such as the same dysfunctional father, in the history of its existence. An educational institution that the kids go to, called an international aristocratic college with top-notch faculty and rich or noble students, where the vast majority of them already have superpowers and perform very well. As soon as the guys entered the territory, the girls immediately noticed Lucas, because first of all, this costume suits him perfectly, and secondly, they are used to the fact that the guy always comes in some rags, and causes everyone only the desire to beat him, but at least for now everything is exactly the opposite. But unfortunately the appearance works only for girls, and boys are quite difficult to surprise with a costume. Previously, the previous owner of this body had no power at all, and only thanks to the help of his sister, he had the opportunity to attend college, and even become an auditor. But Lucas never imagined that he would ever move into the body of a sick person and become an object of ridicule for the strong children. At the entrance, the guys were immediately met by those same ruthless kids, and instead of a normal greeting, they always used some insulting words. As soon as Marina noticed them, she immediately grabbed the guy under the arm and insisted on leaving, because she had absolutely no desire to get into trouble. At the same moment, these guys made it clear that Lucas did not think that if he dressed nicely, he would be treated as a human being. By the way, the name of this main upstart with gold chains Robert. He is quite rich and influential man in the school, but because of the failed attempts to get close to Marina, often began to annoy her brother, because he was very close to her. This time was no exception. He initially asked his potential rival to remove his dirty hands from his clothes, and after he refused to do so, he did it on his own, thus giving him a reason to think whether it was worth it or not. Since the upstart did not expect it at all, his arm was as relaxed as possible, which allowed him to inflict maximum damage from this kind of blow. When his friends saw this, they softly said big from the fact that Lucas even dared to stand up for himself, because Robert has the ability of the 5th level. Which means that if he wanted to, he could start a very serious fight right now. Because a level 5 ability was equivalent to a level 5 chi refining cultivation, but that didn't tell us much. It was important to find out what kind of ability he had. Before starting the fight, Robert recognized that the boy had become much stronger, but in his opinion, even the awakened Lucas would still be a worthless loser. The funny thing about this situation is that the comrades were not so sure about it anymore, and warned in advance that they had gotten it good last time. But even such a warning did not stop Robert. As they say, until he personally gets a blow on the head, no smart thoughts will not come there for sure. First into the battle he sent his comrades, even though they did not want it, unfortunately had no right to refuse, because then they would be in big trouble. When Marina saw that some lawlessness began, despite the precise blows of her opponents, she became like a human shield in front of her brother to try to save him, but the bandits were absolutely indifferent. They were ready to beat even the girl, just so that they would not have questions from Robert. Realizing that the situation is approaching a critical point, our hero gently grabs his sister by the waist and sees her aside to save her from a blow. After that, he immediately counterattacks and gives a strong blow with his leg right on the stomach of one of the attacking bandits, as a result of which he flew away in an unknown direction. When the girl realized what had happened at all, she couldn't understand how her weak, sick brother had suddenly become so powerful. The only logical assumption in her mind was that he had most likely awakened his superpowers. Then behind the back of our hero appeared the second bandit, and judging by his words he was as confident as possible, because just yesterday he was able to awaken the crystalline energy. But the only thing that had helped, so it just dodged the first blow, and the second fortunately has already hit the target. In the end, the crystal energy wielder flew as far away as his trusty comrade. When Robert realized what had just happened, he immediately called them the most terrible words and decided to run into battle alone to show them how to fight to always remain the winner. The bandits spared no effort at all for this occasion, and immediately used one of his most powerful skills, called Sunstroke. Robert was sure that this was the end, because fighting a brainless man like Lucas, who had just awakened, was as easy as destroying an ant. But what happened next is beyond description. Lucas was able to stop his opponent's attack with just one finger, and even managed to laugh at him. At that moment Robert had only one question in his mind: since when had the aura of this weakling become so strong? He just couldn't believe what was happening, because he was sure that only a level 6 ability could stop his shining blow, but not the man who had just awakened. In his head, Lucas realized that level 5 superpowers were rather disappointing, and since he had promised himself that he would protect his family, creatures like this specimen should be punished for the attempt and know their place. Maybe this would at least teach them to turn their brains on before they do anything. As soon as Robert realized that the guy is going to make a decisive blow, he immediately began to beg him not to do it, and reminded that he himself is a member of a very influential family, which is definitely not going to leave it just like that. But fortunately our hero was absolutely indifferent, and he gladly finished what he had started. The rest of the students had different opinions about the situation. They were divided into two camps. The first were madly happy that at least someone could finally put Robert in his place, and supported Lucas, and the others thought it was a big mistake, because the retaliation would not last long. Then after the fight, Marina came to the guy. She could not believe that her brother was finally able to awaken the ability, but nevertheless was very happy, because she realized that from this moment, Lucas will finally be able to fight back, and life will be much easier for him. Meanwhile, instead of going to school, the young bandits went to their boss to tell him about the situation. And frankly speaking, he was extremely dissatisfied that his guys once again could not defeat such a weak opponent as Lucas. In that case, the boss thought it no longer made any sense to keep such weak workers on his payroll, and to avoid any unnecessary problems, decided to get rid of one of them right now, without any ceremony, and without any opportunity to ask for mercy. Also, this formidable gentleman is Robert's father, and given the fact that even his mighty son lost, he asked one of his best mercenaries to find out more information about Lucas, namely since when he became so strong, what his level is, and his superpowers. Since the young boy had no right to refuse, he immediately agreed, and said that everything would be done in the best way, although he had no idea who he was going to go against. In any case, the boss was pleased that the mercenary had a very good attitude and asked him to start as soon as possible. At the same time, Lucas, together with his sister, moved on with their business. And in the process of the hike, the girl could not stop talking about the situation. Certainly Robert deserved such a punishment, but in her opinion the guy was too cruel, and now they will always have to be careful, because the problems will not end there. But even with all his sister's stories, Lucas was not nervous at all, because he realized that the place called university contained much more spiritual energy than any other place. Attending the school allowed him to reach the 7th level of purification in less than a month. That is why he is not afraid of anything at all and is ready to accept any challenges towards himself. Suddenly, the guy felt a strong danger and noticed a huge piece of glass, which with great speed was moving towards him. The impact was blocked and no one was hurt. And also to protect the civilians from the shrapnel, Lucas was forced to use his force and move them to a safer place. So far it was not even roughly clear what happened, and who decided to organize this ambush. At least Lucas has already been injured, and Marina is not really scared. Then David, a professional mercenary, appeared on the horizon. He was quite surprised, because as a rule, a man who had just awakened could not repel such a serious attack and still be able to help people. As it turned out, Marina knew this man quite well, so she immediately asked Lucas not to listen to him, because he was a manipulator. David took the opportunity to tell her that he had come here on the orders of his boss to avenge his son and to put the offender in his place. But even though his boss had asked him to be careful, David had no intention of holding back and would act as he saw fit. Initially, with the help of his unique technique, he remotely grabbed the guy, lifted him into the air, and threw him against the nearest wall with all his might. Then, right in the place where Lucas was, he directed a whole pile of concrete slabs, with the help of which he was going to press the guy into the ground. When the attack was completed, David felt like a real winner, because he was almost 100% sure that his opponent would never get out of there again. But as it turned out, this was just the beginning of the fight, because our hero pulled himself together, and within just a few minutes, broke out of the rubble with a great desire to continue fighting. As soon as David saw this, he immediately decided to attack again to try to get Lucas back under the rubble. Fortunately, this time he did not succeed at all, because after the first time the guy realized what techniques the opponent uses and how to block them correctly, so from now on, David will not be able to hit him, no matter how hard he tried. When David's spiritual warrior was destroyed, he decided to repeat the same trick again, and attack the guy with a huge number of concrete slabs. But since this time our hero was fully prepared, he was easily able to counterattack, and right in flight to break them into small pieces. Judging by the expression on his opponent's face, it can be assumed that except for a couple of tricks, he has nothing else to counter, so the only thing left for him is to just stand still, and hope that after the missed blow, he can at least stay alive. As soon as the bout was over, Lucas immediately said for David that he really possesses good skills, but his only flaw is that the man does not know how to develop his body properly. This is the reason why he lost the fight. Then Marina immediately ran up to the guy and asked how he felt, because against the background of what she had just seen, very scared. In response, Lucas said that he should not worry so much about it, because weaklings like this guy certainly cannot hurt him. David in turn, even being in such a dire situation, informed everyone that this is definitely not the end, and for insulting the Wanjin family, the chief will definitely make every effort to make Lucas' life hell, and will not spare absolutely no resources to do so. Then the very brother and sister whom Lucas had rescued in the park a short time ago appeared on the horizon. When they came closer, they said they were here to see who dared to touch one of the Gu family members. When David heard that, he almost fainted. Little Maria, in turn, was so happy to see Lucas that she immediately ran to hug him and call him all sorts of tender words, like "you are my hero" and so on. To be honest, initially Lucas did not even recognize them, and then when he remembered, and his head immediately arose the question, what are they doing here? Out of curiosity with a disgruntled face, Marina immediately asked her brother who it was, because she at least did not like that Lucas did not tell in time that he had some girlfriend. In response, the guy said that he did not know any of these people, and did not make girlfriends. Chris then called her over to him, and urged her not to molest the gentleman unless he really wanted to. Looking at all these sides, David just couldn't believe his ears, because right in front of him a representative of the Gu family was standing and dodging some boy who had recently awakened. Such an abnormal reaction he had because this family is very famous and its influence extends to many spheres, including military, economic, political and scientific. They have no equal in the city of Kansan. South Lucas' close relationship with them is nonsense. Even the local inspector in charge of the law must first coordinate with the Gu family before making any decisions. But the most interesting thing about the whole situation is that Lucas acts as if he doesn't care at all about the powerful people in front of him. The poor mercenary immediately fell to his knees and apologized for his excessive activity. According to Chris's story, about a year ago David was just an ordinary dog in the family. Eventually he got tired of enduring such a disrespectful attitude and decided to leave to try to create his own gang. But instead he ended up in the opposite family and was able to take a more favorable position there. That's why Chris showed a special desire to take this guy with him, so that he could ask a few questions in a different environment and learn some useful information. In principle, Lucas didn't mind, so he agreed to hand over his offender to the Gu family without any problems. The guys also said that they also came to talk about the very situation that happened in the park, because they are extremely uncomfortable about what happened, and they would like to invite the guy to the Gu house to express their great gratitude for the help he gave them. Unfortunately this time, like last time, the boy refused, because in his opinion this family was so powerful that he could have done absolutely nothing that day and nothing bad would have happened anyway. Anyway, the guys insisted, and asked Lucas to think long and hard about their offer. When Maria ran up again to ask to go to their house, arguing that her grandfather would swear, the guy felt that she was emitting some unique energy, so he decided to hug her a little and examine her body in detail to see where it was coming from. As a result, in the process of inspection, Lucas almost immediately caught the eye of the clown, which the girl was wearing around her neck. In that case, he had nothing else to do but try to get it, and to be honest, it was a little difficult to do it, but still our hero managed it. It turned out to be a very valuable treasure of the earth. The audience in turn has already had time to exhale, because they thought that the guy went not for the clone, but to realize some other goals. Since Lucas was interested in this thing, Maria said that it is just one pendant from the entire ancient collection of her grandfather. It repels evil spirits and nourishes the soul with useful substances. So if the guy has a desire, the girl suggests to go to their house, and there to demonstrate the whole collection. Well, with an item like this, I'm sure Grandpa knows something about cultivation, and Lucas could definitely use a few heavenly treasures to help him practice, so it's best to agree and go visit after all. Before entering the house, the first thing that catches the eye is just a huge territory, personal fountains, parks, a large number of servants, and so on. The scale is really impressive. It immediately feels that you come to visit not the poorest people. Since Grandfather was informed that guests would be arriving very soon, he wasted no time, prepared a menu, and asked his workers to set a sumptuous table as soon as possible. Marina was shocked at this moment, because she had never seen such luxury before in her life. When all were assembled, the old man separately greeted Lucas and his sister. Since the guys had come quite a long way, he offered to sit down, in order to have a tasty snack. But in response the guy brought himself as incorrectly as possible, and instead of just sit down, immediately began to ask questions about the pendant. Given the importance of this meeting, Charlie decided to let this improper behavior pass through, and simply told him that he had a huge collection of these old and dilapidated things. But to be honest, the old man didn't see any specialty, so he was surprised that Lucas was so interested in it. The guy immediately realized that this is just another bluff, because a man who has a huge collection of such items should know exactly what is so special in them. After these words, the old man smiled slyly, and without wasting a minute offered to look at his collection, to which Lucas kindly agreed. But there is one nuance. As it is a personal collection, it is not for everyone's eyes, so Marina was politely asked to stay here while the guys will look through. Chris immediately noticed that she was very nervous, so he decided to calm her down, and jokingly said that Maria would definitely not be there. On the way, the guy was thinking that if the old man wasn't lying, then it was likely that there could be quite a few different magic treasures for cultivators in this world. But these treasures were clearly not created by superpowers. Then one wondered where they came from in the first place. As soon as the guys started to approach the so-called house museum, the guy immediately began to feel a unique aura, which made him even more interested, and the desire to get inside as soon as possible. By the way, Lucas's words about the old man's strong illness were also confirmed, because once in a while he coughs up blood. When the browsing process finally started, the guy was definitely convinced that with such a stockpile of magical treasures, there should be many cultivators in this world, but for some reason, so far, he hadn't managed to meet any. But one should also take into account that not all cultivators were strong, so they might prefer not to show themselves. After a quick look, Lucas confirmed that Charlie certainly has a lot of things, but the quality of these items leaves a lot to be desired. In fact, they are just little things that can only interest the practitioner at the stage of the foundation of Qi. In the subsequent stages, they will be of little or no use. Charlie wasn't upset at that moment, even though he'd spent a lot of energy searching for those treasures, because it was clear to him that Lucas was the one he wanted, and he had to do everything he could to lure him in. The first thing he did was to take Lucas out of the main hall and into the next one to show him his most unique item, but he warned him that he didn't know how to use it at all, so it would be good for Lucas to tell him some information about it and see what use he could make of it. Now the boy realized where the aura he had felt in the beginning was coming from. It's a cursed ring, its ability is in its name. Anyone who touches it will go mad, and in the worst case will be burned by the black flames bursting out from inside. But our hero it never scares at all, because first of all, he even knows the correct name of this object, and secondly knows how to handle it correctly, so that the above side effects do not occur. It is enough to know just a couple of tricks. As soon as Lucas stretched out his hand, the ring immediately broke through the window, and flew to his finger, after which some extremely powerful magical processes began. From the outside, of course, it looked as cool as possible, but Charlie at that moment was just madly worried that nothing bad had happened to the guy. At one point he even verbally tried to stop him, but when he realized that everything was coming more or less smoothly, he just decided to shut up. The flame did not touch him at all, and the guy was not going to go crazy either. It only says one thing: the object is completely suitable for him, and it is unlikely that Grandpa will already return it to himself. Now Charlie is convinced that this is the man he's been waiting for all his life. The ring itself is quite difficult to call a treasure, but no matter how it goes, it helps Lucas a lot now, although it will have to work hard, but the guy just have to use it for their own purposes, and significantly rise in level. The first thing he did was to fully test the artifact, and he entered the spiritual space inside the wooden ring. There he had to face the three-headed hound of hell. In his previous life, Lucas had spent a great deal of time trying to subdue the dog from hell. But he had no idea that he would have to meet him again, only in another world. It's a monster with 3 heads, great strength, and the ability to spit fire with its mouth. This time the guy felt that the wild dog dared to use the spiritual consciousness against him. It even sounded so absurd that Lucas almost laughed, because how could his consciousness be compared to the consciousness of some beast? But in any case, do not be upset, because it is only to the advantage of our hero, and will help to finish the fight without even starting it. To gently probe the ground, Luke purposely absolutely no digging, and at the very last moment, voiced the command to sit. As you might expect, he obeyed the command without any problems at all, and obeyed it immediately. Now the guy was 100% convinced that the dog was really much weaker than he was, and in order not to wait too long, he immediately voiced the next command, to immediately calm down and obey. Since this dog had no choice, it immediately shrank in size, and from the looks of it no longer posed any danger. From that moment on, Lucas became the master of this creature, and if it ever dared to show disrespect, the guy would simply crush its soul. When the mission was completed, Lucas returned to the real world. Now with the help of the ring, the Hellhound can create a physical body with the same level of cultivation as his master, to help during fights, and just to help out in times of need. As soon as Charlie realized that all the processes were finally over, he immediately turned to the guy, and already stated out loud that Lucas was exactly the person he was looking for. But before he could even reply, the old man coughed violently and eventually lost consciousness. Then the emergency mode on the chair alerted Lucas that his vital signs were unstable, which is why he needed immediate medical attention. In this case, our hero has nothing left but to at least try to provide first aid. To begin with, he used his power to scan the body of the victim, and found that the blame for everything is the poison, which has been in Charlie's body for a very long time. It gradually destroys the man from the inside out. The fact that the poison was found is shocking, because despite the power of the Gu family, someone still dared to send the head. Lucas, of course, has nothing to do with it, but today luck is definitely on Charlie's side, and in return for the ring, he saves his life. Right before the start of the procedure, one of the sons burst into the room with the doctor. The first thing they thought that it was all Lucas's fault, so without too much thought immediately began to hug him in everything possible. In response, the guy said that he just wanted to help, but the angry son, listened to him, was not going to. When the angry son saw them, he immediately began to express his displeasure that the boys had thought to leave a stranger alone with Charlie. But even despite such loud statements, Chris was 100% sure that Lucas was really a normal person, and he had nothing to do with what happened to the old man. In this case, the man was very angry, and said that as soon as everything was resolved, he would immediately take care of his grandson's upbringing. To be honest, after the situation, Lucas already roughly understood who most likely poisoned Charlie. But now it's not the most important thing, because ahead of the process of treatment, and the guy is just madly curious about what the doctor will do in such a critical situation. Even the way he's rushing to help, you can already assume that the results of his treatment won't happen, just a show-off for the relatives and a unique opportunity to dump the responsibility on the guy. When the doctor was finally ready, he applied a skill called hydrotherapy. It allows you to manipulate the water in the body to treat internal injuries, but the poison has already penetrated the heart, so this kind of procedure is useless and will not help at all. This is confirmed by the fact that the old man just keeps coughing up blood and is definitely not getting better. After just a few minutes, the doctor steps away from the patient and informs everyone that his symptoms are too strange, so his superpowers can't help. The only thing the relatives can do now is prepare for the funeral and poison Charlie with dignity on his last journey. It was obvious from the outside how upset everyone was, except for the closest person, the son. Instead of mourning his father, or supporting the others, he just pointed his finger in Lucas's direction, and kept claiming it was all his doing, even though he hadn't even seen it with his own eyes. Next, Maria came to the defense of the guy, because in her opinion, since the doctor had failed, the gentleman should be allowed to try to save the grandfather. In response, the man deliberately started to manipulate, and told the girl that how dare she allow the culprit to come closer than 10 meters to the body. Looking at this circus from the outside, Lucas said in a calm voice that if the guys continued wasting time, then no one would help Charlie. They had to solve this issue as soon as possible, and not just stand still and give in to the influence of one person. Of course, this overconfident behavior, Boris did not like, so he immediately decided to remind Lucas that he had no right to say anything here. The wind doctor who had just attempted the treatment, considered the best healer in the city, he had never let anyone down. In response, the guy just decided to clear the air, and made it clear to everyone that Boris has already prevented him from saving the old man several times. Based on this, you can only make 2 years. 1, he is the one who really doubts Lucas' medical abilities so much, and 2, he just has ulterior motives to stall. As soon as Boris realized that the guy had already figured him out, instead of letting him save Charlie, he simply ordered the guards to rush in and grab the culprit. In that case, our hero had no choice but to summon a hellhound and ask them to restrain him. The guards were shocked to say the least, because they had never seen anyone master the summoning technique with such a horrible creature. Chris was also surprised, because he couldn't even reach the level of summoning a beast by himself, but here he saw such a thing. When the issue with the bodyguards was solved, Lucas focused on Boris and informed him that it was advisable to be polite, otherwise he wouldn't be able to deal with the consequences. The moment it finally came to treatment, Guy noticed that the patient's condition had noticeably worsened, due to the lack of blood and chi. However, this was not a problem for him. As long as the actual unreal conditions were combined and the meridians were stimulated, toxins could still be eliminated from the body. In order to solve this issue as soon as possible, Lucas decided to use the Chinese acupuncture method. After seeing this, all the normal people were very surprised, and Boris in turn just laughed and said that there was nothing that could be done to a man who had lost his life. As time went on, even the doctor who had just recommended that the family prepare for the funeral began to think that he had obviously jumped to conclusions. Because this method of treatment is one of the best medical techniques in the country, if used correctly, it can help unload the meridians, eliminate evil, and strengthen the body. Recently, this method has become very special, because relatively recently, only superpowers have been used in medicine, and the ancient medical knowledge has been lost. After listening to this story, Lucasa refuted the fact that the knowledge had been lost, because if you try hard enough, you can still find the information. Toward the end of the procedure, the remnants of poison accumulated in the heart vessels must be displaced by a surge of energy, and just a few minutes later, the old man begins to give the first signs of life, trying to breathe air and understand where he is, a typical state after a coma. Then the relatives immediately ran up to him, and Boris stood aside and said that he knew everything would be fine. The joy of the grandchildren will not be limited, especially Maria. As soon as she saw that everything was fine with her grandfather, she began to cry and could not control her emotions. After a few minutes, Charlie said that it was the first time he'd felt so good since he'd gotten sick, and he thanked Lucas for that. The guy replied that he'd only been able to save the old man because he'd been there for him, so next time, if he got poisoned again, the only thing to do was pray. Then Boris jumped right into the conversation. He thought that Lucas shouldn't make such a claim just because he cured the old man, and this theory shouldn't even be allowed, because there is no one who could do such a thing under the protection of the Gu family. Definitely the reason for the decline in health is the research on superpowers. But even so, the boy had something to say. Because all through the old man's illness, Boris had been trying to slander him that the blame for Charlie's deteriorating health lay solely on Lucas's shoulders. But now it could be seen as an attempt to shift responsibility onto someone else. To be honest, for Maria, Uncle always seemed a little strange, because in fact, Grandpa has not radiated superpowers for a long time, and how it could affect his health is unclear. Chris also remembered that the old man has always been healthy as an ox. The maximum is a problem with his legs, and no more than that. Then, under the pretext of trying to cure his grandfather, Boris started giving him some medication, and his health deteriorated significantly. Because of the strong panic, the man almost got into a fight with Chris, arguing that how could anyone believe some guy from the street and start doubting his own uncle. In order to resolve the situation once and for all, the old man took out of his pocket the medicine he was taking and offered his son to drink it to prove his innocence. Of course, in response, he just started to talk back and resent his father for doubting him, but it was all just a defensive reaction. When everyone in the room realized it, Lucas once again offered him to drink the medicine to prove his point and closed the subject once and for all. The doctor also added that the drug contained only medicinal herbs and could not harm an ordinary person in any way. As soon as the doctor can be said to have framed Boris, amidst a strong anger, he simply could not stand it, sharply pulled out his gun, and fired a precise shot directly into his head. Good thing Lucas was at that moment, and with the help of only 2 of his fingers, was able to stop the bullet. Well, this gesture can be regarded as a sincere confession that the medicine is poisoned. Now Charlie had a great desire to find out what it all meant, but in response Boris pointed the gun at the doctor again, and began to tell him that the medicine was fine, that it was probably the doctor who had poisoned him to frame the direct heir of the Gu family. As our hero had had enough of these childish squabbles, he decided to finally set the record straight. With the help of his strength he knocked the gun out of Boris's hands, and purposely tore his sleeve, so that everyone could see clearly the red spots on his arm, which appeared from the poison when the man spilled it. Initially the guys did not realize what the red spot was, but then the doctor informed them that it was not a birthmark, but a real scar from the poison. As soon as Boris entered the room, Lucas noticed that his breathing was intermittent, which confirmed the fact that the poison had penetrated the skin. Of course, it was not as dangerous as the heart, but it could still take several years of life. Even though it was not very dangerous, Boris started to panic and kept talking about how much he didn't want to lose his life. Then he fell to his knees and started begging Lucas to help him, because there are only a few people in the whole world who know how to do acupuncture. But of course, even a positive answer was not to be expected, so Lucas kicked him with his foot and ordered him to get out as soon as possible. Boris then turned to his father. He admitted that he was wrong, that he had made a huge mistake because of his obsession, and he apologized for it. Unfortunately, considering how terrible a crime his own son wanted to commit, his father simply could not forgive him, and immediately reported that Boris no longer belonged in the Gu family. The best option right now would be to send him to an inspection to refresh his memory a bit. Hearing this verdict, the man began to scream even more, because he realized that the inspection is one of the most horrible places to get to. Sometimes it can be so terrible that a person seriously begins to think about how he would soon lose his life, so as not to feel this pain. Frankly speaking, the family could not even believe that Boris decided to do such a thing, but fortunately there is no reason to be sad, because Lucas as usual was in the right place at the right time, otherwise the grandfather would be simply could not be saved. But now he still wanted to discuss a few questions personally with Lucas, and the first thing the old man wanted to know was whether the guy knew where the legend about the ring that was on his finger right now came from. In order to discuss everything in a quiet stop, the guys decided to move smoothly into Charlie's private office. In the process, the old man began to show pictures and tell me that when he was young he had discovered a tomb and sent people there to explore it. Most of the old collections, including the ring, had been discovered by Ta. Looking at the image, our hero speculated that for a ruin of this scale, it must have been an era of spiritual cultivation, full of spiritual energy. He also theorized that there was something else hidden deep underground, and perhaps it could even help Lucas in terms of cultivation. Further on the story, it turned out so that in the process of research, subordinates frightened the tomb with their careless presence, and triggered the mechanism of self-destruction, so to look personally at this structure will not be possible, because it is absolutely nothing left. However, if it was so important to the guy, Charlie could try to find the rest of the relics. Before agreeing to anything, Lucas decided to talk straight and asked directly if the old man thought it was funny that a researcher with superpowers wanted to help the practitioner. The grandfather replied that no, because the guy had no idea how far he had traveled to get as close to the concept of cultivation as possible. The current one was once young, very obsessed with power and money, and when all that got boring, he gradually started to delve into superpowers. But after careful research I realized that they have many disadvantages. For example, when a person reaches his peak, this power simply begins to destroy his mind, makes a person go crazy and do just unpredictable things, with irreversible consequences. But even though the research had just begun, Charlie had no idea that he had already looked into the abyss and had long ago plunged into its depths, like a tortured soul trapped in darkness, and did not even approximately understand how to get out of it. The power of superhuman abilities far exceeds the capabilities of ordinary people, so Charlie is worried that the same naive and reckless will repeat his mistakes. So secretly from everyone began to study spiritual practices to always be sane, and an order of magnitude stronger than everyone else. It turns out that creating superpowers is creating eternally living people that can become possessed by evil spirits. Before getting to the point, Charlie says that he doesn't dare ask Lucas for anything, but the opportunity to help him is a blessing to his family. And if the guy could teach the old man the art of innocence and brilliance, he would trust him with the future of his family before he lost his life. In response to such an offer, Lucas simply put the pictures back, and said that only those who had discovered ancient religions could discuss the terms of the deal. In the meantime, Robert came to the institution to his father, to ask him whether Lucas has already been avenged or not, but when he saw that the whole club was destroyed, the smile on his face immediately disappeared, and in his head immediately arose the question, where this old bandit again got into, cannot quietly do business. And when he saw the state his father was in, he was speechless. Instead of greeting him, Robert got a slap in the face, because instead of living normally, he was always causing trouble. Then his father asked him to get out of here as soon as possible, while he still allowed it. As it turned out, the Gu family had organized the mayhem, because Chris had personally promised David that he would come to David's house to take revenge for his rash actions. The father was very annoyed by the fact that his son had grown up so self-confident, and did not even think about the elementary consequences.